In a distant land to the north, there lay a kingdom embraced by snow-covered mountains. The king of this realm was gentle and wise, and the queen possessed a beauty as delicate as a springtime rose. They had been married for many years, and their only sorrow was that they had no children. One day the queen sat by the window, her fingers holding an embroidery needle as she sewed a fox fur cloak for the king to keep him warm. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted down like torn goose feathers, each heavy flake landing in thick clusters on the ebony window frame, turning the wooden grain pure white. Suddenly, the needle pricked the queen's fingertip, and 3 drops of bright red blood fell onto the windowsill, 1 drop landing on the snow, another on the ebony wood, and the third rolling down the wooden frame, disappearing into the gap around the window. The queen stared at the intertwined red and white hues and softly made a wish. If heaven grants me a daughter, may her skin be as pure as this snow, her lips as red as this blood, and her hair as black as this ebony. Perhaps touched by the queen's heartfelt wish, 6 months later, she truly gave birth to a baby girl, a child who looked exactly as she had envisioned. The king was overcome with joy and named their daughter Snow White, but happiness seldom lasts long. Just 3 months after Snow White's birth, the queen fell gravely ill. On her deathbed, she grasped the king's hand and repeatedly implored him to care for their daughter well. The king, heartbroken, raised Snow White alone. Little Snow White was intelligent and kind. By the age of 3, she could already help the maids identify medicinal herbs, and by 5, she would wrap bandages around injured birds in the forest. Her smile was like the warm sun of spring, melting the ice and snow from the hearts of everyone in the kingdom. As she grew older, her beauty became more and more striking. Watching his daughter, the king felt she deserved a complete family. So at the minister's suggestion, he married a princess from a neighboring kingdom to become the new queen. This new queen was indeed breathtakingly beautiful. Her eyes were like sapphires, her skin smoother than fresh cream, and when she walked in the sunlight, even the flowers seemed to bow their heads in shame. But the queen possessed a heart colder and harder than ice. She was extremely arrogant, and nothing mattered more to her than the title of the most beautiful woman in the world. In her bedchamber stood a massive magic mirror, forged by a witch, capable of answering any question related to beauty. Every morning, the queen would put on her gem-studded robe, stand before the mirror and softly ask, Magic mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in the world?" A layer of white mist would ripple across the mirror's surface before a deep voice responded, "Your Majesty, you're the most beautiful woman in the world. Your radiant beauty can drive away all darkness." Only after hearing this would the queen allow a smile to appear on her lips and begin her day in a pleasant mood. But in the year Snow White turned 7, something happened that changed everything. That morning, the queen asked the magic mirror the same question as always. But this time, the mirror hesitated before answering. "Your Majesty, you are very beautiful, but Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you. Her innocence shines brighter than gemstones, and her kindness is warmer than sunlight." The queen staggered backward in shock. The silver comb slipped from her hand and struck the marble floor with a sharp, ringing sound. She rushed to the window and happened to see Snow White feeding the doves in the garden. The girl was dressed in a white gauze dress, sunlight glimmering on her jet-black hair, and even the doves circled around her, unwilling to leave. Jealousy slithered into the queen's heart like a venomous snake, gnawing at her day and night. She began forbidding Snow White from wearing nice clothes, forbidding her from playing in the garden, and even forced her to move into the attic, where she had to do the heaviest chores each day. But even when Snow White wore rough linen clothes and her face was smudged with dust, her beauty could not be hidden. The queen's temper grew more and more violent until one day she could no longer endure it. She summoned the bravest hunter in the palace, handed her a sharp dagger in a velvet box. Then, in a voice icy enough to freeze bone, the queen said, "Take Snow White into the depths of the dark forest. Kill her. Then bring back her heart in this box. I want to see with my own eyes that she is dead." The hunter looked at the queen's twisted expression and felt a wave of terror, but he did not dare defy her command. He could only nod in agreement. He went to Snow White and gently said, "Little princess, The strawberries in the forest are ripe. Would you like me to take you to pick some? Snow White had not been allowed outside for a long time, so she happily agreed at once. The two of them walked into the dark forest, where the trees stretched up into the sky. Their branches intertwined so tightly that only scattered fragments of sunlight filtered through. When they reached the deepest part of the forest, the hunter stopped. He drew the dagger from his waist, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't bring himself to strike. Snow White sensed something was wrong and tilted her small face up to ask, "Hunter, what's the matter?" Looking into her innocent eyes, the hunter finally threw the dagger to the ground, fell to his knees and cried, "Princess, the queen ordered me to kill you. I just can't do it. You must run. Run as far as you can and never return to the palace." Snow White trembled with fear. She grabbed the hunter's sleeve, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Hunter, what did I do wrong? Why does the queen want to kill me?" "You did nothing wrong. It's the queen's jealousy that's at fault." The hunter took some bread and water from his pack and handed them to her. "Take these and run east. You might find a safe place there." With that, the hunter ran deeper into the forest. Not long after, he killed a wild boar, placed its heart inside the velvet box, and brought it to the queen. Seeing the bloody heart, the queen smiled with satisfaction, convinced that Snow White had vanished from the world forever. Meanwhile, Snow White was running through the dark forest all alone. Night began to fall, and wolves howled in the distance. Terrified, she hid behind a large tree, hugging her knees as she cried. She didn't know how long she ran, but her legs eventually went numb. Just when she was about to lose hope, a faint light flickered ahead. Summoning her courage, she walked toward it. The closer she got, the more clearly she saw that it was a small wooden cottage. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light glowed through the windows. Snow White gently knocked on the door, but no one answered. She pushed on it, and to her surprise, it opened. Everything inside was tiny and charming. A small table covered with a blue tablecloth, with 7 little plates on top, each with its own tiny spoon. Beneath the table were 7 little chairs. Against the wall stood 7 small beds covered with Snow White sheets. Snow White was starving. She walked to the table, picked up the smallest plate, and ate the bread and cheese on it. Then she lifted the smallest cup and took a sip of wine. She didn't dare eat too much, afraid of troubling the owner. Afterward, completely exhausted, she curled up on the smallest bed and fell asleep almost instantly. At midnight, the door of the cottage swung open, and 7 dwarfs stepped inside. They were miners who worked in the mountains, each only about 3 feet tall, with soot-covered faces but bright, lively eyes. The first to notice something amiss was Know-It-All. He pointed at the table and said, "Someone's touched my bread." The second, Happy, shouted, "Someone ate my cheese." The third, Sleepyhead, rubbed his eyes and said, "Someone drank a sip of my wine." The fourth, Sneezy, sneezed and said, "Someone sat in my chair." The fifth, Bashful, blushed and whispered, "Someone's been in my bed." The sixth, Grumpy, jumped up in anger. "Who broke into our house?" The seventh, Old Stubborn, spoke calmly, "Quiet, let's check the beds." The 7 dwarfs walked to the row of beds and found Snow White sleeping there. Her skin was white as snow, her lips as red as blood, and her hair, scattered across the pillow, looked like strands of exquisite silk. "Heavens, she's truly beautiful," Know-It-All couldn't help but whisper. "She must be a kind girl," Happy added. They didn't have the heart to wake her, so they took turns keeping watch by her bedside until dawn. When Snow White awoke and saw the 7 dwarfs gathered around her, she jumped up in fright. They hurried to comfort her, telling her not to be afraid. Snow White then recounted everything that had happened to her. The dwarfs were furious when they heard her story. That wicked queen! How could she be so cruel? Grumpy stomped his foot in anger. Old Stubborn looked at Snow White kindly and said, "Princess, if you don't mind our simple home, you can stay with us. You can help with cooking, washing clothes, and tidying up, and we will protect you." Snow White was so touched that tears filled her eyes and she nodded eagerly. From then on, Snow White lived together with the 7 dwarfs. Every morning, the dwarfs went up into the mountains to mine, while Snow White stayed home to do the housework. She cleaned the cottage until it sparkled, washed their clothes until they were spotless, and always prepared a delicious dinner for them. When the dwarfs returned each day, they were greeted by warm meals and the comforting feeling of home. They often brought Snow White pretty wildflowers or shiny little stones, and their days passed in peace and happiness. Each time the dwarfs left the house, they warned her repeatedly, "Princess, never open the door to strangers, especially the queen. She will not stop until she finds you." Snow White remembered their words well and kept all the doors and windows tightly shut every day. But they didn't know that the queen had already discovered the truth. That day, as usual, the queen stood before the magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, who is the fairest woman in the world?" The mirror replied, "Your Majesty, you are the fairest in the palace. But in a small cottage in the dark forest, Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen trembled with rage. She now knew the hunter had tricked her. Snow White was still alive. She locked herself inside her chamber and used magic to craft a corset ribbon, enchanted so that once tied around a person, it would squeeze the breath out of them until they died. The queen disguised herself as an old peddler woman. She covered her face with layers of veils, carried a basket full of goods on her back, and quietly slipped out of the palace, making her way toward the dark forest. She walked for 3 days and 3 nights before finally finding the dwarf's cottage. Standing outside the door, she shouted in a raspy voice, "Goods for sale! Beautiful ribbons, lovely hairpins, everything cheap!" Snow White heard the voice outside and peeked out from the window. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'd love to buy something, but I can't open the door. The dwarfs told me never to open it for strangers." The queen quickly said, "Little girl, I'm just a traveling merchant. The weather is so cold, I only want a sip of water. Look at this ribbon. Isn't it beautiful? It matches your dress perfectly. I'll give it to you as a gift. How about that?" Snow White looked at the ribbon embroidered with gold thread. It was indeed very beautiful. She thought, "It's just a ribbon. It shouldn't be dangerous." So she opened the door and let the queen in. The queen picked up the ribbon and pretended to tie it around Snow White's waist, saying, "So pretty, just a little tighter, and it'll fit perfectly." Suddenly, she yanked the ribbon with all her strength. Snow White immediately struggled to breathe, her eyes widening as she collapsed to the floor unconscious. The queen looked triumphantly at Snow White lying on the ground and burst into wild laughter. "Now you'll never compete with me again." After confirming that Snow White was no longer breathing, she finally left the cottage. That evening, when the 7 dwarfs returned home, they were horrified to find Snow White lying motionless on the floor. Know-it-all quickly knelt beside her, examined her carefully, and soon discovered the ribbon tightly wrapped around her waist. "Quick, loosen the ribbon!" he shouted. Grumpy rushed forward and tore the ribbon apart in one pull. After a moment, Snow White slowly opened her eyes. She told the dwarfs everything that had happened, and they were all shaken with fear. They warned her again, even more sternly. "From now on, no matter who comes, you must never open the door, no matter how beautiful the gift is." Snow White nodded obediently. After the queen returned to the palace, she immediately rushed to the magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in the world?" But the mirror replied, "Your Majesty, you are very beautiful, but in the little cottage in the Black Forest, Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen couldn't believe her ears. She knew Snow White had survived once again. This time she was even more furious. She used magic to craft a poison comb, coating it with a deadly toxin. The moment it touched someone's hair, that person would instantly fall unconscious. Once again, she disguised herself as an old woman and headed to the dwarf's wooden cottage with the poisoned comb in hand. She shouted loudly, "Pretty combs for sale! Combs that make your hair black and shiny!" Snow White said from the window, "I can't open the door for you. The dwarfs told me not to let strangers in." The queen smiled and said, "My dear girl, I only want to show you this comb. Look how beautiful your hair already is. If you use this comb, it will be even more beautiful. I don't want your money, I just want you to try it." Snow White hesitated. She looked at her slightly messy hair and thought of the dwarf's warnings, but she still couldn't resist the temptation. She opened the door just a crack. The queen quickly handed the comb to her and said, "Here, let me comb it for you." The moment the comb touched Snow White's hair, her vision went dark and she collapsed to the ground. The queen burst into laughter and said, "This time you definitely won't survive." Then she turned and walked away. When the dwarfs came home and saw Snow White lying on the ground again, they were terrified. They searched everywhere and finally found the poisoned comb tangled in her hair. Sleepy quickly pulled the comb out, and after a while Snow White slowly woke up. This time the dwarfs were truly angry. Bashful's face turned red as he said, "Princess, how could you not listen to us? If this keeps happening, your life will be in danger." Snow White knew she was wrong. Crying, she promised that she would never open the door for anyone again. After the queen returned to the palace, she once again asked the magic mirror, but the mirror's answer was still the same. Snow White was more beautiful. This time, the queen completely snapped. She swore that she would make sure Snow White died. She went into the secret chamber of the palace, where she kept all the dark magic she had learned from witches. She took out an apple, half red and half white, looking incredibly tempting. She coated the red half with the most poisonous toxin in the world. This poison had no antidote. One bite would cause instant death, and even after dying, the victim's face would remain rosy, as if peacefully asleep. To be extra cautious, the queen applied a thick layer of disguise on her face, turning herself into a wrinkled old peasant woman. Then she carried a basket of apples on her back and headed toward the Black Forest. She arrived at the dwarf's wooden cottage and called out, "Fresh apples for sale, big and sweet apples." Snow White leaned out of the window and firmly said, "I can't open the door for you, and I won't take anything from you." The queen didn't get angry. She pulled out the poisoned apple from the basket and took a bite from the white side. "Young girl, I know you're worried I might be a bad person, but look, I ate it and nothing happened. I'm just passing through. I have too many apples and wanted to give you one to try. If you still don't believe me, I can cut this apple in half. I'll eat the white half and you can eat the red half." As she spoke, she pulled out a small knife from her waist, sliced the apple in two, and handed the red half to Snow White. Snow White watched as the queen ate the apple without any reaction, and the red half looked irresistibly delicious, giving off a sweet, fragrant scent. She hesitated for a long time but eventually opened the door and accepted the red apple. She had barely taken a small bite when she felt her throat tighten. She collapsed to the ground and never woke up again. Seeing this, the queen finally smiled with satisfaction. Then the queen laughed all the way back to the palace. She rushed eagerly to the magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in the world?" The mirror finally answered, "Your Majesty, you are the most beautiful woman in the world. No one can surpass your beauty." Hearing this, the queen jumped with joy. She had finally eliminated the thorn in her side and could now rest easy. At dusk, the 7 dwarfs returned. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground, they were overwhelmed with grief. Doc examined her body and found that she was no longer breathing, and beside her was half of a bitten apple. They knew that this time Snow White was truly dead. The dwarfs couldn't bear to bury her in the cold earth, nor could they stand the thought of wild animals harming her. So they decided to craft a crystal coffin for her. They searched the entire forest and found a huge crystal. Using their tools, they slowly polished it bit by bit until it became a clear, sparkling crystal coffin. They placed Snow White inside it. Her face was still rosy, as if she were simply asleep. The dwarfs carved her name and birth date onto the crystal coffin, then placed it beneath a pine tree on the mountaintop. Every day, a dwarf kept watch beside her. The animals of the forest came to mourn as well. Little birds sang for her, squirrels brought her nuts, and fawns stood quietly nearby, keeping watch over her. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Snow White's appearance remained unchanged, as if she had only just fallen asleep. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom passed by the mountain with his attendants. He heard the sorrowful singing of little birds and found it strange. So he followed the sound up to the mountaintop. When he saw Snow White lying inside the crystal coffin, he was instantly captivated by her beauty. He stood there motionless for a long time, his eyes filled with admiration. The prince approached the dwarf who was keeping watch and respectfully said, "Dear dwarfs, I know how much you love this young lady, and I feel the same. Please let me have her crystal coffin. I am willing to trade all of my wealth for it. I will guard her as if she were the most precious treasure in the world for all eternity." The dwarfs were deeply moved by the sincerity in the prince's eyes. Grumpy said, "Your Highness, we don't care about wealth. We're only afraid that you won't take proper care of her." The prince quickly replied, "I promise you I will treat her as my wife and protect her with my life." After discussing it among themselves, the dwarfs finally agreed to the prince's request. The prince ordered his attendants to lift the crystal coffin carefully so they could bring it back to his kingdom. During the transport, one of the attendants tripped over a tree root. The crystal coffin jolted sharply, and the piece of apple stuck in Snow White's throat suddenly popped out. A moment later, Snow White's fingers twitched, and then she slowly opened her eyes. When the prince saw Snow White awaken, he was overjoyed. He rushed forward, took her hand, and said, "Beautiful maiden, you're finally awake. I am the prince of a neighboring kingdom. I found you on the mountain, and I was just about to take you to my castle." Snow White looked into the prince's sincere eyes, and as she remembered everything that had happened to her, tears streamed down her cheeks. She told the prince her story. After hearing it, the prince was furious and swore that he would avenge her. The prince brought Snow White back to his kingdom and announced to the entire nation that he would marry her. The news quickly spread to every country, including the kingdom Snow White was originally from. When the queen heard the news, she became extremely curious. She wanted to know what kind of woman could make the prince value her so highly. So she dressed herself carefully, put on her most magnificent gown and most precious jewels, then stood before the magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in the world?" The mirror replied, "Your Majesty, you are very beautiful, but in the neighboring kingdom's palace, the new princess is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen became even more curious and decided to attend the prince's wedding in person to see what this new princess looked like. When the ceremony began and the new princess walked down the red carpet, the queen was stunned. The new princess was Snow White. Terrified, she turned around to flee, but it was already too late. The prince had prepared guards who immediately stopped her. Snow White looked at the queen with calm eyes and said, "Queen, you tried to kill me 3 times. Now it is time for you to face your punishment." The prince ordered servants to bring out a pair of iron shoes that had been prepared in advance. The shoes had been heated until they glowed red hot. Soldiers forced the queen to put them on. She let out a piercing scream. She was forced to dance in the great hall, and the burning iron shoes made smoke rise from her feet. Each step felt as if she were stepping on fire. In the end, the queen died in agony during the dance. With the wicked queen gone, Snow White was finally free from her past. She and the prince held a grand wedding, and the 7 dwarfs came to celebrate, offering her their most heartfelt blessings. After the wedding, the prince and Snow White ruled the kingdom together. They were kind and wise and deeply loved by the people. Forest animals often came to visit Snow White, and the palace garden was always filled with laughter and joy.